I think the men today were like, you know what? That's fine. I want to provide, right? And I want to lead, but I want more. I want to be in this, right? I want to be in my kid's life. I want a really, really good marriage. I want a life that when I'm on my deathbed, I can be like, you know what? That was awesome.
Today's guest is Larry Hagner, founder of the Dad Edge and the Dad Edge podcast. Over the last 6 years, Larry has interviewed over 700 experts on parenting, mindset, communication, health, and making marriage better. In today's episode, he shares some of his best insights in these categories and how he has a thriving marriage. He's a proud father of 4 boys. We get into that today. Enjoy today's conversation.
I remember when I grew up, if your parents were in couples therapy and your friends found out about it, it was taboo, man. And you were just labeled as like, oh, your family's broken. Like, look at you, right? And I think that's more widely accepted now that a lot of people are in therapy. However, there's still that gap between like, well, if I go hire a coach or if I go get help for this, I'm broken. Something's wrong with me. Nothing is further from the truth.
Larry, welcome officially to the Fit Father podcast, my friend. We're so happy you're here.
What's up, Dr. Anthony? It's good to see you, man. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun, man.
This is fun. And for once you're on the other side of the interview table, you know, you run the Dad Edge, a wonderful community for dads and a podcast. And you've interviewed a lot of guys and women about parenting and being a good man and a good father at the same time. So my intention of our conversation today is honestly to just, one, have our listeners get to know you and what you're doing at the Dad Edge. And then 2, to extract some of the most profound wisdom that you had through many of those conversations and anything that's just kind of like on your mind right now. So let's first get a little bit into, you know, why you started the Dad Edge, give us some of the backstory, and then what the Dad Edge does and what kind of work you do in the world.
Well, thank you very much, man. So the Dad Edge, we're a group of imperfect fathers, you know, just trying to level up what we call the 5 dimensions of being a man, husband, and father. So 5 dimensions, meaning we really focus on marriage. Marriage is one, or the relationship with your partner, if it's a significant other, whatever situation you might be in, but really the relationship skills to communicate, to connect, to level up intimacy, all those things. We teach those skills. Around parenting, it's really about connection. It's about leadership. It's about, spending time with your kids and where you're fully present in the moment. The hamster wheel shuts off, you know, you're actually fully engaged in that moment. And what we're really interested in is helping men create a connection that the end result of that is a ton of incredible core memories, right? We're an adult child, you know, he's 30, 40 years old, looks back on his relationship with his dad and he's like, dude, that guy was awesome, right? I mean, not always awesome. There's going to be thorns in every rose, right? But overall, like, man, my dad was in my life. Like it was a good experience. He talked to me. He was interested in my life. You know, he did life with me. That's the parenting aspect. Leadership is another thing we focus on. And that's because we need, you know, society, we need more men who are solid leaders. And that's a totally different skill set, right? To be able to lead within ourselves and also to lead within our families, right? And a lot of us, you know, and I don't mean this as a downer on men, because this was me as well. We kind of go into the back seat, right? When it comes to leading our families, right? We actually allow sometimes the mom, you know, the wife to make like, well, whatever you want to do or whatever you think, right? She decides everything. And not the fact that we have to decide everything, but we have to learn these skills within leadership in order to lead ourselves and lead our families, right? Because where else are our kids going to learn that from? Another one is finances. So just being, you know, I'm not saying you have to have 9 figures or anything like that, but to be able to have a mindset that money is a tool and we can create wealth, right? And we can do more with our money, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a thing that we're constantly stressed about. And then the last thing is what your world is, and a big part of my world, which is health, right? But not just physical health. So physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health. That's what we focus on at Dad Edge.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, this is what you just described. If a guy is taking intentional actions and getting support and investing in those categories, I mean, it's an incredibly well-rounded, fulfilled life that's good for all parties involved. It's deep work you do.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And it's also probably why you've been able to do this for so many years. I mean, how many years have you been doing the Dad Edge for?
We're just shy of a decade now.
Right?
So, yeah.
Cool. So here's a question. Have you seen anything change culturally in that time? Like over the last 10 years, like when you were starting out, you were having these ideas and conversations with dads. And that must have been like in 2014 or something like that. And now, 2024 at the time recording this, like, has the landscape for dads shifted? Has the cultural conversation shifted? Like, what's really relevant today that might not have been relevant back then? Or is it basically the same stuff?
That's a great question. I was just having this conversation with one of my coaches actually yesterday, and we were talking about the landscape. So I remember, I mean, if I really think about when Dad Edge really got started, it was 2011, so it's really been around since 2011, but the podcast didn't really get started until 2015. And, one thing I've noticed about the landscape is that I think overall, like, let's just talk about fathers today. And this is where I really want to applaud fathers today, because fathers today, we were raised by our generation of dads, which I think how they really viewed themselves, because they were raised by our grandparents, which in my opinion is one of the toughest generations on the planet, right? They survived world wars. They survived the Depression. They had to, a lot of these kids, like I remember my grandpa telling me he had to go get a job in sixth grade because he had to help support his family through the Depression. So like, and then he was, went into the military. He was an MP. Like my grandfather was a hard dude. He was also very compassionate, affectionate, right? And I think back then that was a really hard mixture for a lot of guys, but that's the generation that raised our dads, right? And our dads, I think, really view themselves as, I mean, I think you get mixed bag of tricks as far as like experience goes of people with their own fathers. But I think overall, it was like, I'm the provider. I do spend time with my kids, but I don't really know what it means to be in my kid's life other than I'm providing. I've got a roof. We got a roof over our heads. We have food on the table, and that's pretty much it. And I think the men today, so the dads that you and I are, we're like, you know what? That's fine. I want to provide, right? And I want to lead, but I want more. I want to be in this, right? I want to be in my kid's life. I want a really, really good marriage. I want a life that when I'm on my deathbed, I can be like, you know what? That was awesome. It wasn't always awesome, but for the most part, man, I did it and I did it well. And I think when I first got started in this space, I know for me, I was looking around for resources back in 2011, 12, 13. I was just like, I really couldn't find a whole lot because there wasn't a whole lot of people talking about this topic. So I was like, well, if there's no one that I can really find that I resonate with, then I'm just going to do this. And the way I went about it was I just was like, I just want to learn. And it's still that way. Like when I'm on my own podcast, like I just view myself as the student who's literally sitting in the front row. But I think that the landscape that has changed is we have men now that are like, they're super eager. Like they're wanting to learn. But the gap is that they're like, okay, I really want this end result. I really want this amazing marriage. I really want to connect with my kids. I really want to feel and know that I'm leading. And I want to be able to take care of myself from a health perspective, from a mindset perspective, all these things. But I just don't know exactly what that looks like because we're kind of the first generation that wants all five of these dominoes to fall and we want to get the hang of them.
Yeah. And we have so many frames of reference with the internet of people doing things that catch our eye and like, man, maybe I'd like to do that. And then tons of different resource that we could. So we have this inundation of all these different mirrors and lenses that we could see ourselves and others through, and a ton of resource. And it's problematic in different ways, and I also think due to the fact that we didn't have as many, in our generation, like World War type stuff, we have this kind of a little bit of like a softer, the emotional intelligence is, a little more fluid. And, I think we're going to be passing that on to hopefully our kids, and then generations continue to change. It's very interesting to think about. Okay. So a question for you is like, what do you think one of the biggest blind spots are for dads right now in modern landscape today? Like what are some blind spots that, guys are not seeing or that you see happen often in people you coach in the mastermind?
Oh, that's a great question. I see a lot, but I think so. Let's just talk about. I think one of the biggest blind spots is the perspective. The perspective of and let me share with you what that looks like. And man, I fell into this so hardcore it wasn't even funny. And I'll even compare this to health and fitness because you and I are both like just fitness junkies, right? So if you look at anything that we do well in life, anything, right? Like you didn't become Dr. Anthony by being like, you know what, I think tomorrow I'm going to be Dr. Anthony and I'm just going to go click this button on the internet that will give me the certificate. And suddenly I just know everything there is to know about health, wellness, and everything I teach my clients about, right? You had to put in how much, let me just ask you, how much education did you have to go through to
It's
get your
probably
credentials?
close to 3 decades now.
Right. Right. But,
Yeah.
and you're very good at it, right? You're confident in how you serve people. And I mean, look at you aesthetically, like it's obvious, you know how to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen by accident. You had to educate yourself, right? 3 decades of education. But the perspective probably never was, well, if I'm going to go be the healthiest version of me, and by the way, I'm going to go help thousands of people be the healthiest versions of them. Well, I better know what I'm talking about. And I better learn the skills and everything to do this around exercise, nutrition, water, sleep, supplements, all these
Mm-hmm.
things that are so important. And we don't take that approach to what you did as in like, I'm just going to wing it. And the perspective, I think we don't do that in our careers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that in martial arts with like jujitsu.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that. You don't go get a PhD or your doctorate by
Mm-hmm.
accident. But when it comes to parenting and when it comes to especially marriage, that is our perspective is like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm just going to wing this. And I don't think we ever say that to ourselves. I'm just going to wing it, but that's what we do, right? It's like, well, wait a second. I mean, think about the societal stereotypes, right? I remember when I grew up, if your parents were in couples therapy and your friends found out about it, like it was taboo, man. And you were just labeled as like, oh, your family's broken. Like, look at you, right? And I think that's more widely accepted now that a
For
lot of
sure.
people are in therapy. However, there's still that gap between like, well, if I go hire a coach or if I go get help for this, I'm broken. Something's wrong with me. Nothing is further from the truth. Like you would never label yourself as like, I don't know a whole lot about health and nutrition. I'm broken. Something's wrong with me. You'd be like, no, man, just go out and get your doctorate, go out and get your
Mm-hmm.
degree and you'll learn it. So I think that's one of the biggest blind spots is that we feel that if we need help in those 5 areas that I talked about, that we are individually, we are broken, we're weak, we're less than. And that is not true.
Yeah.
In fact, I would challenge that thinking so much that you will continue to feel broken, weak if you don't learn the skills, right? Because
For
once
sure.
you've learned something and you implement it, the world is kind of becomes your oyster. It's like all
Mm-hmm.
the answers to all your questions and how you can operate now become totally different. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a very relieving feeling. And I'm sure going back to you, and this is maybe more of a question for you, when you have a client that comes to you and they're like, "Hey, man, I'm struggling with libido.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I'm not sleeping right. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I've got abdominal body fat that no matter what I do, it won't go away. Can you help me?" And
Mm-hmm.
you know the answers to those questions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great answer. It's, and I think for guys, many guys have a tendency to be so hard headed that we repeat the same mistakes
1,000%.
over and over in patterns until we work them out. And that's why, like in my experience, now this is like kind of getting into my spiritual metaphysics. Like I believe this life experience is like a constant feedback loop that ultimately gives us a chance to purify, to learn, to overcome, to make shifts, to elevate, or we just keep on giving ourselves the same lessons over and over. And relationships are one of the biggest ones. I also think, and this will be the second comment I'd love for you to dive on these topics, that we're in our families working out generational wounds and traumas that inherently get passed down in terms of what the parenting structure we experienced and then how we interpret that and how we push that to our kids and what they're going to do. It's like every family in a sense is also having the opportunity to purify, typically through pain. And I know that's very relevant to your life story. So please comment on either of those as you see it.
Yeah. So, man, that's such a great question. Have you ever heard of I'm sure you probably have heard of this term, pattern breaker. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Or like people talk about pattern interrupt, but I like the term pattern breaker, right? And that just really, that's a term that I like to use when it comes to, this is someone who's going to do something different, right? No matter what my past was, no matter what I experienced, I'm going to do this differently. So maybe this would be best if I just kind of share a story around this, right? Because I think no matter what your story is around generational trauma or an experience with a parent, you know, the people that you trust the most, you actually have the opportunity to change it. But I'm also going to share 3 different types of men and their mentality around this, right? Because we're all these 3 types of men. So my story, and I'll keep this super high level and quick based on time, but my mom and biological father were married young, like 21 in 1971. They had me 4 years later in 1975. They went through a horrific, horrible divorce. My dad left. I have no recollection of my dad at all, like none. In fact, I remember being 4, and I remember kids getting picked up at my preschool by their dads, and I knew, oh, that guy's in a suit, he's a dad. Oh, that guy is in, blue collar, whatever, that's a dad. I always knew, like, that guy is a dad. And I knew I didn't have one. It didn't really bother me, though, because at 4 years old, I thought moms go out and find dads, and my mom hadn't found mine yet. And that was fine. I was like, well, she hasn't found it yet. No big deal. I'll never forget when I was 4, my mom said, hey, I'm having a friend over. He's a very special friend. I've had him. We've been friends for a while, and I'd like for you to meet him. That was my mom's way of saying, I met a guy at work. We've been dating for a while. I really like him, and I want you to meet him now. So I'll never forget that, because like when this guy came over to my house, it was the first time a male actually walked in my house. Full suit, briefcase, like white collar data software engineer. His name was Joe. And the very first thing I asked this guy when he walked in my house, because I looked up at him, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the dad. That is dad. And I shook his hand. He said, it's nice to meet you, Larry. I said, it's nice to meet you. Are you going to be my dad? Like literally, I was just like beaming. Are you going to be my dad? And my mom, I think, kind of really took that as like a Jerry Maguire moment. And she married the guy like 6 months later. Now, I'll tell you, they stayed together for the next 6 years, and they were horrific. The first year was pretty cool. I felt like we were this happy family, but he drank a lot, and so did my mom. And they would get in physical fights all the time. They would get in verbal fights a lot. He'd beat the crap out of me. He would say things to me like, I mean, it was not uncommon for me to just get like slaps in the face and like, points in the face and, quit crying, you're a baby and all this other stuff. Like, it was horrible. But that was my definition of a dad. They got divorced when I was 10. I've never seen him since. I found out about 10 years ago he died. I ran into my biological father by accident when I was 12, 2 years later. We had a 6-month relationship. He was remarried at the time. He's still remarried to the same person. He had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way. We spent 6 months together. It was the best 6 months of my life. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, my dad's back in my life. And then he left again. And that killed me, man. Killed me. So like that abandonment, like 3 times that happened by the time I was 12. My mom continued to date, and she got married again, total 3 times. It was a revolving door of toxic, horrible, abusive, drunk, drug addict men. That was my experience. I went on to college, got my degree, got a great job in medical device sales, married my best friend, who I'm still married to today. And when I was 30, 2 things happened. Number one, we got pregnant with our first child, which I was terrified because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, all my background's been this. Like, what am I going to do? And I met my biological father again. We were in a Starbucks, and we just so happened to walk in at the same time to get our coffee, and I knew exactly who he was. Yeah, and we've had a relationship now for the past 19 years.
Wow.
So that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff to deal with. So there are 3 types of men, right? And I'll go through this. There's the victim, and I lived in that camp a long time, man. And that's not a pleasant camp to be in, but it makes total sense to you while you're in it. The victim says this: I was raised by horrible fathers, and I saw my mom get divorced 3 times. Therefore, I won't have a successful relationship with my own wife, and I will probably be a terrible father. And as soon as I would do something that would, like, I'd lose my patience with my kids, or my wife and I get in a fight, I would actually prove it to myself. And I would say, see, I'm not a good father. I just lost my patience. See, I'm not a good husband. We can't communicate. And that's the victim. So the victim will tell you the story of why they're not going to be successful. They'll also look for the proof that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So then, how do you get over trauma, and how do you be a pattern breaker? You move into the next camp, which is the second type of a man, which is the content zombie. Now, the content zombie sounds more like like it's not a good thing. However, it's actually way better than the victim, because the content zombie is like, you know what? I'm going to change. Yep. I'm going to figure this out. But the content zombie reads books, right? Which is fine. It's great. The content zombie will consume, sometimes I get guys that come into our mastermind, and they're like, I listen to 20 hours of podcasts a week. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that's a lot of information. But they're listening to content, they're taking in content, but nothing in their life is changing.
Mm-hmm.
But they now have some new information. But the real pattern break happens when you become the third type of man, which is the executor. The executor, and you have clients like this, and I do too. The executor is like, okay, I just learned this.
Mm-hmm.
right? I just learned actually how to be more patient with my kids. And when I get challenged with some sort of, just stimulus, like they're acting out, or I just want to like lose my crap on them, I know one skill set that I can do is create about 4 seconds of space between reaction and response, right? Between stimulus and response. And the first thing I'm going to do is respond like this, right? Or maybe I'll validate that kid's emotion if they're having a breakdown or something like that, where they implement that skill. And by implementing those skills, that's how we become the pattern breaker.
Yeah,
Yeah. And we actually can be the one that shields our kids from that generational trauma. We
for
just have to
sure.
choose. We have to choose to do it by doing the work, learning the work, and implementing the work.
100%. I mean, all that you just said is really true from my vantage point. And, I can see my psyche in different stages of that development. And it's cool when you have that overarching framework that you just presented, because I feel like our whole lives in our families can kind of be this dojo experience. It's like,
Mm.
it's all training.
Yeah.
Like it's all
Oh
so
yeah.
relevant. Like everything we do then is it's in this context of making us better, helping us embody, more love and leadership and better communication. It's like all becomes one thing. Two, I think there is a stage in learning when everyone's getting their mental models and soaking in a lot of the information. It definitely needs to go to that mature application stage. But if you're here listening right now and soaking things in, especially if you're soaking things in while also taking action, that's a very powerful process that's happening and understanding. I'm wondering if this is true to you, Larry. Is it possible for someone to be victim mindset only in one area of their lives? Or is it if they feel that way, like there's victim mindset showing up in their marriage or maybe with their fitness, is that inherently bleeding into all areas? Is the presence of a victim mindset something, or that kind of pattern, something that is ultimately all pervasive if it exists, or can it really be compartmentalized?
Incredible question. So like if you really look at, I think, some of the things that we deal with, right? And I'll talk about, like, I think when it comes to, like, let's just say those 5 dimensions that I was talking about, right? Marriage, parenting, your health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, finances, leadership. You could be in one of those 3 camps within those 5 dimensions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might be like thriving. Like I consider I have great things, strengths, right? But I also have really fantastic opportunities to be better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a great example here, and I think it's in your world. When it comes to marriage, like, I view myself as an executor. Like, I love the skills within marriage. I love the skills that we teach within marriage. I I use them to level up our relationship with my wife all the time, and we've got a great relationship. I mean, it is the best I could ever have hoped for, right? At 21 years of marriage, which blows my mind. Like, it actually wasn't our honeymoon phase of our first 10, 13 years that were amazing. It's actually been the last 7 that have been the best. And the biggest difference has been the executor, right? I'm going to learn this stuff and I'm going to put it into my marriage. I've also have done this with my kids, right? And I view myself as I really know how to connect with my kids. I'm not perfect at it. I mean, I still lose my patience. I still do those things, but I do execute, and those things are good. Right now, I'll give you a great example of health, right? I was the fittest, the leanest, and I have never felt so good about myself at 48 years old than I did last August. I was
Mm-hmm.
about 7.5% body fat.
Mm-hmm.
My 14, he's now 16, but we actually did a bodybuilding show together in
That's awesome.
2022. It was great. We had a blast. And I kept that fitness for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like I was 7% body fat. I felt on top of the world. Well, then I injured my knee during a workout, and it was horrific.
Mm-hmm.
I injured it so bad I ruptured what's called the synovial membrane, and my knee bled internally for 12 weeks. I didn't even know it. I thought it was just swollen,
Yeah.
but that just completely incapacitated me. I couldn't run. I couldn't walk more than like 100 yards. I was depressed. I couldn't work out. And guess what? I went from executor, bam. I mean, it was like a hammer into that victim camp, to
Mm-hmm.
where, like, and here's the funny thing. You can actually still stay pretty lean, I think,
Yep.
by eating right,
For sure.
training right, even if you can't do like your cardio, like if you really tighten that diet up and you
Mm-hmm.
train everything else, on point, you're going to stay pretty close. And I had a lot of really fantastic nutritional coaches and fitness coaches tell me that. But what did I do? What do you think I did? What do you think?
Man, I mean, part of me thinks like you had waves and cycles of periods of like feeling really down on yourself and slipping, and then knowing and having all this awareness that you've created over your life, being like, no, this is not how I'm operating, and getting back on it. And slowly you weaved your way out of the hole, but it took some time going through cycles.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. So I got depressed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what did I do when I got depressed? I ate. I went a year without drinking alcohol in 2022 to 2023 in October. I started drinking again.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like anything to kind of like numb the pain of my reality that I couldn't do stuff. Right. And that's what I was telling myself. Well, I can't do everything that I want to do. I would get on, like, I'd start to walk, be like, see, I can't walk the way I want. I can't do cardio because I can't
Mm-hmm.
walk right.
Yes.
So I really fell into that victim mindset. Well, then I got surgery on my knee in November, had to go through about 4 or 5 months of physical therapy. And you and I are recording this the weekend before Father's Day. And
Mm-hmm.
it was 2 weeks ago. I finally ran my first 3 miles as fast as I could before I got hurt,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't all that fast. I did it in like 26 minutes.
It's something
But,
though.
but to me,
Yeah.
it was fast. I haven't been able to run, but I was like, something changed, right? Because what I did is I was literally in that victim camp. And I was telling everyone why I couldn't actually execute. I was convincing myself I couldn't do it. And as a result, I went from 7.5% body fat, 168 pounds, to 185 pounds and about 14% body fat.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, this sucks. And I was so depressed. And because it was part of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is I started back on like, okay, I really need to be better about this. So what did I start doing? I started consuming content again. Like, how can I make this better?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can I do? Right. Started then executing, implementing. I got on the scale this morning. I'm 175. I don't know what my body fat is, but I am leaner than what I was. It's probably sitting around 11 or 12. So I'm getting back to that. But it took getting, back into that mindset. But do we live? Are we one of those 3 guys in some of those camps? Sure.
Yeah.
But life feels really good when you're the executor in all.
For sure. That's a beautiful thing to aim at, and to have the grace and self-awareness, and that there are seasons and things happen and different pressures. And we can accept that we actually have a limitation without being a victim. And I think that's a subtle thing. It's like, you can say, I can't barbell squat right now because
Right.
I have a bleeding membrane in my knee. And that's a true statement. But you could also then have the feeling and direction of your focus into things that you could do. Well, I still can show up and do my physical therapy rehab exercises, or research ways to stop the bleeding, or, do XYZ. So it's like, we can still be realistic, because I think a lot of guys end up like, they want to be realistic and they fall into this pessimism, but we can still accept limiting training conditions in our lives while still maintaining positivity. Can you speak into that a little bit?
So even though I just want to make sure I understand your question. We're in the pit, but we can still maintain positivity.
Well, I think like the statements that you described as like in the victim mindset is like, I can't do X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. And it might be true when you're in your 70s and you're still doing your fitness, that you can't do something that maybe you could in your 50s or your 40s. Like, you might not be able to load your back with a barbell and do squatting in the same way that you did. Someone could take that experience of limitation and become victim. Another person could take the experience of limitation that inherently happens throughout life and still maintain positivity. So I guess it's possibly, I'm asking about like reframing, accepting conditions as they are that may actually be quote unquote limiting, without being a victim to those things. That's what I'm asking you to speak into.
Yeah. So I can speak to that with a couple different things. I'll speak to that within my marriage, and I'll speak to that within fitness. I'll do the easy one first, fitness, right? Because that's just one of my passions, and quite frankly, what was my world before I got into this. My degree is actually sports medicine with a minor in nutrition. So, I remember going through physical therapy, and remember I was so frustrated with feeling so limited. I mean, I couldn't even do a full rotation on a stationary bike without tremendous pain in my knee. And I was like, I'm never going to get better at this. You know, this is going to be my life. Like, I caught myself in that victim mindset. I remember going into physical therapy and I told myself, I'm going to do whatever I can do, and I'm going to do it the best I possibly can, period. And I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better every time I'm in here. And man, when I switched that in my mentality, things did start to change. Like, cause I expected that I was going to succeed. I couldn't run. I remember I love to run. I started running again. And I remember my physical therapist saying, like, okay, here's what you're going to have to do. I know you love running 3 miles at a time. You can't do that right now. And a lot of people, like, think about the extreme nature of just men in general. If I can't do something all out, I'm not doing it at all. Right. If I can't go to the gym for an hour and a half, I'm just not going today. Right. But she told me, she's like, I want you to run a light jog, 1 lap, 1/4 mile. Then I want you to walk a 1/4 mile. Then I want you to run a 1/4 mile. And then I want you to walk 1. Then I want you to, once you're comfortable with that, then I want you to start running a 1/2 mile, then walk a 1/4, run a 1/2, run a 1/4. And I did that. And I did that for probably a couple months. And it wasn't until, like I said last week, I'm like, I got out and I'm like, I'm going to run 3 miles, period. I don't care how long it takes me. And as soon as I started running, I was like, I feel like I'm fast again, like fast as I was. And I hit the timer and I was like, I'm going to try to make 26 minutes because that's about what I was running before. And I made it back to my house in 26 minutes and 42 seconds. Nice. But it was that mental shift of like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this step by step. So that's how that shifted. Right. But you have to like literally tell yourself that. It's the story that we buy into. The same thing happened with my marriage. So when I got really depressed, because I really was in a season of depression over this, it impacted my marriage with my wife. And I remember saying stuff to her like, I know I'm not the man that I used to be. And I know that like I'm getting out of shape. And I know, and most importantly, my mental health was I think the worst because like I was so depressed. I've been training almost every day for 30 years. Like and I'm not saying train hard, but I do something active every day. And when I couldn't do that, I was really depressed and it really impacted my marriage. Like my wife, thank God she's a patient, forgiving woman because like she had to deal with me. Yeah. And I'll never forget asking her, and this was not too terribly long ago, it was a couple months ago. I was like, hey, is there anything you want to share with me that maybe you haven't shared or something that you think I might not understand or just any type of feedback that you have for me that you think I should know that you've been holding back? And she's like, and my wife is amazing. She's very low drama. She goes, are you sure you want to hear this? And I'm like, oh crap. I was like, yeah, I do. And she's like, okay. She's like, I'll tell you. She's like, yeah, you're not the same guy. You're depressed. Your fuse is shorter with the kids. And I feel like you're kind of cold and distant with me. And like, you're just not letting me in. And it's kind of hurting me a lot. She's like, I'm not leaving you or anything like that. Like, I understand this is season, but I want my guy back. And I was like, what do you think needs to happen for that guy to come back? She's like, I just want you to talk to me again. I just want you to chase me again. I want you to take me out on dates again. Like, I just want to have deep conversations where I feel like there's nobody else in the room, just like we used to. That's really all I want. She's like, and I just want to see you smile again. That's it. And she looked at me and she goes, I know you're depressed and all that, but like, that's the guy I miss. And as soon as my wife painted the picture of that guy that she missed, that gave me, well, I can go, I'm going to step into that because that's still the same guy I am. I'm just telling myself I'm not. Yeah. So I went, that's a season where I went from victim also back into executor. And here's the thing. I didn't skip over the content zombie totally. I hired a coach. Like, and I view myself as a great married guy. I hired Keith Yackey, who's the founder of Married Game.
He's a friend of mine.
You know him? Yeah. Yeah. And I hired him. I was like, I need help and I don't want to do this on my own. And I think that's we can talk about that too. A lot of guys like to go at it alone. I'm like, I'm not wasting my time or my energy or I don't want to be frustrated. I want someone to tell me this is what you need to go do. Go do it. And I'm going to hold you accountable to go do it. And when you go do it, I want you to come back and tell me how it works. And I will tell you, hiring Keith, Best thing I ever did for my marriage, for my mental health, and it got me back.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful share. I mean, there's so many lessons that I'm kind of still like sifting through listening to that. One thing that came to my mind immediately, and this is more of a contextual lesson, is just the beauty of your relationship with your wife. And because you guys have these systems for the communication of like those honest reflections, the open, safe space of that, it appears to me, and I'm sure you'd agree, that your marriage is like this sacred container through which you become a better man. It's like a container that you can step up into and become better. And I think there's a lot of guys listening to this that probably feel like their marriage is actually like nothing like that. In fact, it might feel like in some sense like a black hole that's draining them. So I do want to talk a little more on marriage. So have that thought there. One other thing was interesting is, you've been married for, what'd you say, 21 years, you said?
Yeah, I've known her for 28 years. We've
Okay.
been married
So
for
21 years of marriage, and you have a wonderful marriage, as you've said many times, and we're learning more about it. And there's all these little periods of times when the spark is, when you need to reconnect, even though you have these great skills. And then, there's these drifts and all these factors. So anything I've shared related to marriage, let's get a little bit deeper into that, because I think it's a very relevant topic.
Sure. So I think when it comes to marriage, we go back to that perception piece, right? Which is, if anything you do good in life, you learn how to do it. Like, I mean, even think of I think all your listeners probably played sports as a kid. There was always a coach teaching you the technical skills on how to play that sport, whether it was football or basketball. I just coached basketball for my 8-year-old's team. And it was so funny, like things that come so naturally to us, like dribbling the ball and how to shoot. You got to break that down into like 3 and 4 step processes for them to really understand, like, how do I dribble this ball and run at the same time? Right. And also, how do I dribble this ball, stop so I don't travel, and pass it before my feet move? Things like that just come naturally to us because we've learned them. It doesn't come naturally to them because they're learning it. And if you really think about anything that we do in life, even our jobs, our careers, martial arts, or anything, there's training. And when it comes to marriage, not many of us really understand that if you want to have an extraordinary marriage, that doesn't happen by accident either. Like, you have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn how to connect with your wife. You have to learn how to fulfill her 3 basic needs, which are to be seen, to be heard, and to feel safe. If you can do that, she feels really great about the relationship. And oh, by the way, a man's 3 basic needs in a relationship is to feel respected, appreciated, and validated, right? So when those 3 needs are getting met on both ends, that's when the relationship feels amazing. But the gap usually is like, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I do that on the daily? I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, right? But there are certain, like, for instance, in our group, we teach 11 skills alone just for marriage, communication, connection, and intimacy, like tactical things that men do. And I think when it comes to marriage, like, a lot of guys, me included, for 10 plus years, was like, well, if I love her, that's enough, right? And she loves me, that's enough, right? And then we kind of get in this thing, well, I feel like I'm not in love with you anymore, right? And that, I think that's a huge miss. And the last thing I'll share is this, and this saddens me. There isn't a week that goes by that there aren't 2 or 3 emails dropped in my inbox from a man who listens to the podcast, who is doing life by himself, because that's usually the way I see it. And he is absolutely just struggling in his marriage. Like, I got an email yesterday from a guy named Ryan, lives in Australia. His wife and him haven't slept in the same room for 2 years. And they have not had sex in 2 years. And I asked him, I was like, what was the start of all this? Like, how did this even happen? Like, how is this even still happening? He's like, well, I had COVID, not too terribly, or I had COVID 2 years ago. She slept in a separate bedroom and never came back. And I was like, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, I wish I would have talked to you 2 years ago, because we could have fixed this way earlier, right? But I think that's one of the things that people, another perception issue is, I have to know how to do this all by myself. And I rely on the feelings of just love, which, be careful with that one. But the other one is, allowing something, not being proactive in our marriages and being ahead of something, because we don't do that in other areas of our life. Like I look at your teeth, I've seen you smile. You obviously go to the dentist, and so do I.
Mm-hmm.
We don't wait till like our teeth start falling out of our head. We're like, I think I should probably go to the dentist now.
Yeah.
Right. We don't wait until our engine light comes on or our car blows up before we go get an oil change, but we'll do that in our marriage.
Yeah.
So it's like I think the strategy really needs to be, how do I learn how to do this? And how can I stay ahead and not get into a point where I'm reacting?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So proactivity is key, I think.
Love it. Totally resonate with all of that. Towards the end of this convo, I have a couple kind of like,
Sure.
I still want to get some depth. It's not like we're running out of time, but I want to ask you in some of those categories we've been discussing today. We'll start with parenting. What are some things that you used to believe were true that you no longer believe, or some commitments that you once upon a time made relating to parenting that are no longer relevant or no longer seem true? Some stuff you changed your mind on related to parenting.
Yeah. So I think parenting, I'll combine parenting and marriage, right? So I used to think, well, my kids are going to learn relationship skills by dating and the friendships they have and all that. And that used to be my perception. Like they're going to learn it firsthand, which they will. But the thing that, and I had a podcast guest bring this to my attention years and years ago, and it has landed with me ever since. They're like, that is true. But you know where they really learn it from is by watching you and your wife. I was like, oh, I never thought of that. He's like, dude, you are a 3D dimensional walking, talking. They have a front row seat in the movie theater of your relationship with their mom.
Yeah.
They watch everything that you do. The best lessons in their relationship skills are caught and not taught. So if they see you, communicating with Jessica, being fun loving and humorous and affectionate with her and respectful, and she's doing those things back to you, your kids see that. And you have set the standard of how they're going to operate in relationships. And here's the funny thing. That is so true. Like I see my boys who are 16, 18, they're dating now. Like my 18-year-old stayed single for a long time. And I'm like, why are you single? Aren't girls like, he's like, I don't have any patience for these knuckleheads. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I want a relationship like you and mom have. Like, and some of these girls, like, they're just like, they're not there. And I'm like, then I saw it, and he just told me this like recently, and I was like, oh my gosh, that podcast guest was dead on. Right. So I think those two intertwine. The other thing when it comes to parenting, and I think this one's an easy one, and I think that we could really give your audience some like value here. The quality and the depth of your relationship with your kids is actually based on the quality of the conversations, the psychological safety that they feel talking to you about things that they're even not excited to talk to you about, like maybe the F they got on the test, but like asking them really fantastic, good, deep questions to get them thinking, right? So I stay away from questions like, how was your day? Because it's a BS default question that really doesn't result in anything more than a one-word answer of good, fine, busy, crazy, boring. Instead, I like to ask my kids 3 questions every day. And I have a psychological reason why I ask these questions. So I ask them, tell me about the best part of your day. And I'll vary that up. Tell me about a highlight. Tell me something you're proud of, whatever, right? What I'm actually doing is, yes, I'm interested in the answer, but what I'm really interested in is the connection, because I want to train their mind that no matter what their day was, there's something good that happened, right? Yeah. And then how great do we feel when we get to share something we're proud of with someone we care about and someone who cares about us? So the energy and the connection goes way up, and they'll be like, dude, Dad, I got a B+. I got a B+ on the science test. Like, and I'm like, oh my God, man, you must feel so amazing. How'd you do it? Right. And then that will turn into a conversation of how they did it. So they can really dig into their own success. Right. Then I'll ask them, the second question is this, and this is the psychological safety one. What'd you fail at today? What'd you fail at today? What'd you learn? Right. Because anytime, like I remember growing up and I'd be like, I can never tell my mom or anybody who's in my house what I did bad today. Because shame, guilt, blame, pain, those 4 things are coming your way. So I want my kids to get used to that, failure. I think it was Michael Jordan got the game-winning ball, the game-winning point opportunity 944 times. I think that number is somewhat right. he scored 133.
I didn't know
Right.
that.
Yeah. So like, think about that. He failed like 700 times out of
Yeah.
that 900. So he failed more than he succeeded. But he's still known as the greatest basketball player of all times. So like, I want them to fail. I want them to get used to that. That's okay as long as you're learning. And they'll tell me, they'll be like, I got an F on the science test, right? I'd be like, oh man, that took some courage to tell me. So tell me more. What happened? And then we'll backtrack, and I'll be like, well, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do different?
Mm-hmm.
Like I would do this, and this, right? And then that way, number one, I'm the safe guy you can tell this stuff to.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it, right? We'll dissect it. I want to help you be better after this, right? Versus like, what do you mean you got an F? We don't get Fs in this. We have family. Give me your phone. You're grounded for 3
Yep.
weeks, right? So that's the second question. And the third question is, what are you most excited about tomorrow or in the future or this week? And the reason I ask that question is because if my kids tell me like, hey, I got track tryouts this week, I got track tryouts tomorrow. So when they come home, I have a launching pad to show them. And because I am genuinely interested, right? I'd be like, dude, how did the 100 meters go?
Mm-hmm.
How'd it go, man? How'd it go? I know you're excited about it. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
And then in their mind, they're like, oh my God, like he remembers.
Yep.
Right. So that connection can actually happen with those 3 types of questions on the daily. Right. And the last thing I'll say is this, that second question, the psychological safety, if you get day after day, rep after rep of your kid telling you what they failed at, you're going to become their 3 a.m. call.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like your kid, whether they're a kid or an adult, they're going to be at a party. They're going to be somewhere where they drank too much, and they're going to have to make a decision. Do I call my dad? Do I call somebody, or do I roll the dice? And I always tell my kids, I'm your 3 a.m. call. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've had so much experience of, you can tell me bad things and you'll be just fine. So call me at that 3 a.m. when you need me.
Those questions were gold, Larry, like serious gold. And thank you for taking the extra step of explaining the undercurrent of how that works. It makes so much sense. It's really beautiful. And I'll say on the second one, if you're a dad listening to this, or, not even necessarily being a dad, and you have the experience where if someone says something to you that is the bad news or something that's not good, and you automatically flip into this kind of like rage mode or get quote unquote triggered by it, it is something inside of us that is getting triggered. It's not something inherently wrong with what our child or whoever we're interacting with did. And so insofar as we feel these triggers, or, the Smiths don't do XYZ, that's just an egoic frame that we create that we're projecting out of our own pain onto our kids, that sucks the safety out of the relationship, keeps us stuck in our same short-sighted patterns, and then we're not growing. We're just becoming more rigid, and we're pushing our kids away. So that just seems relevant to share as well. It's like there's the personal growth opportunity for us insofar as seeing what things are our kids doing that we get triggered by, and that's where our growth needs to happen, or could happen, I should say.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. Really well said, man.
Okay. I want to ask you, just because, we share this passion for health and fitness, and this is a health and fitness community. What are some things that you used to believe are really true in maybe the nutrition or the exercise category, or stuff that was very relevant, 20 years ago that might not be as relevant now? Like, how have you shifted in the health domain?
That's a great question, because it's shifted a lot. I mean, I used to, like I said, I got my 4-year degree in that, and I spent a lot of time in the fitness industry, and I still love it to this day. The things that have shifted for me is that diets are not a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of this stuff like the carnivore diet, I don't even know how many there are now, but there's so many diets. Yeah. And I think I know you have to find what works really, really well for you. I'll share this, and I'm there's like some kind, for some reason, there's a little bit of shame that goes with this, what I'm about ready to share with you, but it's worked for me tremendously. So like, I used to eat animal protein at every meal, every single meal. Right. And I did that forever. My blood work though was never really all that optimal. So like my testosterone wasn't all that high. My estradiol was kind of high. My cholesterol was through the roof. Even my ApoB levels were high and all that stuff. And I hired this nutrition coach back in 2019, who's a vegan bodybuilder by the name of Fraser Bailey. And I was just like, I cannot believe I'm actually going to try this. And I tried it, and it took me a while to get the hang of it. but I absolutely I was 100% plant-based for about 4 years. And recently I've gone more to like a 70-30.
Mm-hmm.
So like 70% plant-based, 30% animal protein. Cause I incorporate some fish and some red meat every now and again.
Mm-hmm.
But my blood work just completely optimized. I was shocked. Like my testosterone went up, cholesterol went way down, estradiol went way down. Like everything, like even my doctor was like, "What are you doing? Like your blood work is unreal."
Yeah.
And I was like, "I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but I'm plant based." And he's like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What about protein?" I was like, "I still get 170 grams of protein in
Mm-hmm.
a day, no problem." And so I think that there's not a one size fits all for
Yeah.
a diet. I think you have to find that individualized thing that's going to optimize that blood work. I think I was the leanest I was and felt the best. So that was one that was different.
Nice.
The other thing too is I used to believe that reps and sets and all that were a thing. And now it's like mechanical failure, mechanical overload, and time under tension.
Yeah.
So that's really what I try to focus on when I'm in the gym. And but I would also say this: my fitness goals were very short sighted when I was younger, and now what I'm going to be 49 here in a month, and what I'm really interested in now is like how can I get wellness, longevity, productivity, and just like I'm now shooting for like when I'm 60, I'm going to be better in shape than when I was at 50. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is my new goal.
Love that. Wonderful answers. I appreciate that. Couple final questions here.
Sure.
Just kind of just personal stuff. I think is just fun to put a little bow on this. Is what's a no or refusal, like a refusal you need to make in your life, something you need to say no to that you're currently postponing or putting off, or does that exist? Is there anything in your life that like you actually know deep down you want to cut off or create a boundary around, but you're just kind of like kicking the can down, or you just haven't done it?
That's a great question. I would say alcohol. And let me caveat that with I'm not a big drinker. But and for me, like I said, I've done 2 years now. I did 1 year in 2016. I did 1 year no alcohol. And then in 2022 to 2023, I did 1 year no alcohol. And it really wasn't a big deal to me to give it up. What I've noticed is though, like, so for instance, my wife and I are going on a date night tonight and she's looking forward to having a couple of drinks. And I sit there and I kind of battle with that. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Probably cause I was raised with alcoholism in my family, but I'm always like, there's this level of like guilt or like I'm going against like something I know to be like completely and totally unhealthy. Like I had James Swanwick on
Yeah, I
the
know him
podcast
too.
and you know him too. Yeah. He's like, yeah, alcohol is nothing more than poison in beautiful bottles. And I was like, wow, it's like, and I'm sitting there drinking it. And I'm like, that is something that, to be honest, I don't have a problem with it consumption wise, but I have a problem with it perception wise. And I don't really feel it's necessary, but yet I will still, like tonight, we'll still have a couple of drinks,
Yeah.
but it doesn't sit well with me. But I could totally be like, you know what? That just needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's cool. That's cool to feel into that, because it's it's like it's more complex than it seems. I mean, it's your family history. It's wanting to connect with Jessica. It's you can control it, and you're also not the urge, but it's not good for you. That's like a beautiful dance. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot through that process, whatever you choose. Is there a gift that you have, like a gift, a talent, a skill, a passion, interest that you're not using or leaning into right now that you'd like to?
Yeah, I would love to get back to martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
I've done 4 different types of martial arts in my life. It was something I was so passionate about. When we started having kids, I put it off. And right before I got hurt, I went to jujitsu for the first time and I just fell in love with it. And I haven't been back since, but I would absolutely love to be back into martial arts.
Love it. And last question is like, where's the dad edge going? Like, let's say we're back here in 1 year from now and we have another conversation. Like, what has happened in that time? Or even another version of that question is just cast us the near term vision next couple years. What's planning? What's cooking up? What's the vision for the dad edge?
The vision for the Dad Edge is we're still going to have the Alliance, right? Which is that's our basic program. We've got 800 members who are part of that. We also have what's called the Dad Edge Business Boardroom. That's for our business owners. And then what I'm going to start doing is more one-on-one coaching. I don't do that too much, but I'm going to start doing that. The other thing too is I'm launching next year. I'm going to launch another book called Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. That's going to come out next Father's Day in 2025.
Nice.
Then I'm also going to host rites of passage retreats for fathers and sons. And I'm also going to host a dad-daughter retreat next year as well. So that's going to be coming.
So cool. Well, yeah. I'm really grateful that we're connected. And I know there's going to be a lot of people in our community that be interested in all of that. So, I'd love to have you back on and keep you connected with what we're doing, especially as you have some of these experiences that you're hosting next year for your book. We'd love to have you back to talk about that as well. In closing, where can you direct people to connect with you further past this conversation?
Sure. You can head on over to the Dad Edge. If you're looking for marriage stuff, like some of the questions we were talking about for marriage, I've got a free tutorial course. It's it's only 15 minutes long. You get a PDF with 25 intimate questions. It's called 25 Intimate Conversation Starters. You can find that over at thedadedge.com/25 questions. It's a quick video and a PDF that you can literally just print off and go have some fun with your wife through conversation.
That's so cool. I love that. And that would be the practice of being an implementer, not just being stuck in content zombie. So if that's interesting to you, go ahead and do that. thedadedge.com/25 questions. Larry, thanks for your time today. We appreciate you a lot.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Fit Father Project podcast. If you love what you heard, please rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps spread this show to more men who need this valuable info. To watch full video episodes of this podcast and other motivational videos to inspire your training and more, visit our Fit Father Project YouTube channel. It's free and everything's made for busy guys over 40 like you. Visit youtube.com/Fit Father Project to get access to our entire video library. And finally, if you or someone in your life is interested in becoming a fit father or needs help losing weight, building muscle, and living healthier after age 40, then visit fitfatherproject.com where you can see our proven programs, supplement line for guys 40 plus, and free meal plan and workouts to get you started. This is Dr. Anthony Balduzzi signing off. I'll see you in the next episode.